He laughed at her, in front of a room full of people who got paid more per hour than her mother earned in a month. He laughed at a 9-year-old girl, pointed at a stack of international contracts, and said, "Translate these. I'll give you $100,000. He meant it as a joke. She meant it as an answer. And by the time she finished, by the time the German investor had gone completely still, by the time the woman from Dubai had leaned so far forward her chair creaked, by the time the most powerful man in that building had stopped smiling and started calculating, the only thing left of his certainty was the sound of his own laughter echoing back at him in an empty room. But that's not where this story begins. It begins the night before, with a mother sitting on the edge of a bed, talking quietly to a daughter she was terrified of losing, and a secret that had been buried so long it had grown roots. The thing about Zara Osei was that she had never once walked into that building like she owned it. She had walked into it like she was trying not to be noticed. 11 years, every morning, through the revolving glass doors of the Mercer Vance Tower in downtown Providence, Rhode Island, past the security desk, past the lobby cafe where the Americanos cost $9 and the baristas knew every VP by name, and down the service corridor to the supply room where the mops and the carts and the industrial-grade cleaning solution waited for her, like the most honest things in the building. She liked the work. That is the part of this story that most people, when they hear it, find hardest to believe. She genuinely liked the work. The satisfaction of a floor that went from dull to bright. The particular silence of an empty office at 6 in the morning. The whole city still dark outside, the city lights bleeding gold across the carpet. When it was just her and the quiet and the feeling that she was, for a few hours, the one person holding the whole building together. She had been doing it since Zara was born. Since her husband Marcus left for a construction job in Nevada, and the money he sent back got smaller and less frequent and eventually stopped entirely. Since the world had handed her the specific arithmetic of raising a child alone in a city that had long since stopped being affordable, and she had done what women in that situation have always done. She adapted. She learned the building's rhythms. She learned which floors were used on which days, which executives worked late, which ones arrived early. She learned to be finished and gone before the morning staff arrived, which meant she had to start before 5 a.m., which meant she had to get Zara up and dressed and dropped at her neighbor Mrs. Adienka's apartment by 4:30. Zara had never once complained about that. Not once. And that, the silent, steady, uncomplaining way her daughter absorbed the shape of their life, was the thing that sometimes made it hardest to breathe. The night before everything changed, Nadia sat on the edge of Zara's bed after lights out and watched her daughter sleep for a long time. The school had called that afternoon. Not a bad call. Not a call about behavior or grades. Zara's grades were something that caused her teachers to use words like unusual and shouldn't be possible and, once, I genuinely don't know what to do with her in a tone that was not at all unkind. The call was to say the building's heating had failed. Repair crews wouldn't get to it before morning. School was canceled. Nadia had a choice. Mrs. Adienka was visiting her daughter in Baltimore. The backup, a woman named Carol from the 3rd floor, was working a double shift to the hospital. There was no one. She could call in sick. But calling in sick meant no pay. And no pay this week meant the electric bill went into the red, and the electric bill going into the red meant the conversation she'd been avoiding with herself for 3 weeks got impossible to avoid. So she made the decision every parent in that situation makes when the options run out. She would bring Zara to work. She would tuck her into the staff break room with her school books and her snacks and the battered French dictionary Zara carried everywhere like other kids carried phones. She would tell her to be invisible. She sat on the edge of the bed and watched her daughter sleep and told herself it would be fine. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea. Before we go any further, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and drop in the comments where you're watching from. I'm genuinely curious how far these stories reach. Because this one traveled. The next morning, Zara woke up at 4:15 without being called. She was dressed by 4:20. She was waiting at the front door with her backpack, navy blue, one broken zipper, a small keychain of a silver bird that had belonged to Nadia's mother, by 4:30. Nadia stood in the hallway, looking at her daughter for a moment. "You heard me on the phone last night?" "No," Zara said. "I just knew. They took the bus in the dark." Providence was still mostly asleep, the streets slick from an overnight drizzle, the sky that particular shade of pre-dawn gray that feels like the world is still deciding whether to commit to the day. Zara looked out the window the entire ride. She did not ask where they were going, even though she had never been to the building. She did not ask how long they'd be there, or what Nadia wanted her to do, or whether she'd be allowed to come home for dinner. She just looked out the window with that expression she had, the one that was impossible to read from the outside and that Nadia suspected, from the inside, contained more thoughts per square inch than most adults would ever have. At the security desk, Nadia signed her in as guest. She tucked her into the fourth-floor break room. She set up the workbook and the granola bar and the juice box, and she crouched down so she was eye level with her daughter, and she said, quietly and clearly, "Be small. Be quiet. Don't give them a reason to notice you." Zara looked at her. "Okay, Mama." She said it the way she always said things, so calm, so contained, that you didn't realize until later she'd already decided something. 3 floors up, the Mercer Vance Towers executive suite was quietly coming apart. The Vance Group, the private equity firm that occupied floors 11 through 14, had spent 18 months assembling an international investment consortium for what the press release would call a landmark cross-border commercial development initiative and what the lawyers in the room called the most complicated deal we've touched in a decade. The delegation was already here. Tobias Kraus and his associate from Frankfurt, precise and patient in the way of people accustomed to things going according to plan. Yuki Inoue from Osaka, whose stillness in a room was the kind that made you aware that she was observing something others couldn't see. And on the video screen mounted at the far end of the conference table, Farik Tashkentov from Dubai, a man who had built 3 empires and lost one and built 2 more, and who was watching the morning's events with the mild, unreadable expression of someone who has seen most things before. The translators, 3 of them, agency-sourced professional, not cheap, had been in a collision on I-95 at 6 a.m. All 3 were at Rhode Island Hospital. None were seriously hurt, but none were coming in. The firm's managing director, a man named Preston Hollis, got the call at 7:40 and spent 20 minutes on the phone trying to source replacements before accepting that there was no one available on 4 hours' notice who was cleared for the confidentiality requirements of this particular deal. He was still trying when Douglas Meade, head of facilities, a man whose primary skill was solving problems that no one else wanted to admit were problems, walked into the break room looking for a stapler and found a 9-year-old girl at the table with a paperback French dictionary, translating the lunch menu posted on the wall into 3 different scripts, just because she had run out of other things to do. He stood in the doorway. He stared. He looked down at his phone and back at the girl. He looked at the notepad in front of her, English on one side, French down the middle, and what appeared to be German on the right. And he said, slowly, "How many languages do you speak?" Zara looked up. "Conversationally? 4. Reading and writing? 5 if you count Arabic, but my grammar is behind my reading." Douglas Meade looked at her for one more second. Then he picked up his phone and called Preston Hollis. "I think I found your translators," he said. "It's complicated. Come to the break room." When Nadia heard footsteps in the hallway and looked up to find Douglas Meade and Preston Hollis standing in the break room doorway, staring at her daughter, she felt a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Is she yours?" Preston Hollis asked. "Yes, I'm sorry. I had no childcare today. She's not going to be any trouble. She'll stay in here the entire." "How long has she spoken German?" Nadia stopped. "Since she was 6. Our neighbor taught her." Preston and Douglas exchanged a look. French, Arabic, some Japanese. "Our building." Nadia stopped herself. "Our building." What she meant was, we live in a walk-up in the Olneyville neighborhood, where half the residents are first-generation immigrant from a dozen different countries, and my daughter spent her first 9 years as a sponge inside a Tower of Babel, and I never once thought to tell anyone. "Mrs. Osei," Preston Hollis said carefully, "we have a situation. She's 9 years old." "I know. She's not. I know." He held up both hands. "I'm not asking her to run the meeting. I'm asking if she can help us get through 40 pages of contract language in 4 languages so that a 9-figure deal doesn't collapse because 3 adults rear-ended each other on the interstate." Nadia looked at her daughter. Zara had put down her pencil. She was looking at Preston Hollis with an expression Nadia recognized from the time Zara had decided something without yet saying it aloud. Manga. Zara's voice was quiet. Can I see the documents? Harrison Vance was the kind of man whose wealth had become load-bearing. Remove it and something essential would collapse. Not the world around him, but something inside him, some central structure he had confused over decades of being deferred to for personality. He was 61. He had built his first real estate portfolio at 28, his first fund at 35, his reputation at 40 through a hostile takeover that was still taught in business school as a case study in either ruthlessness or strategy, depending on the professor. He had 4 ex-wives, 3 children who called him on his birthday because their lawyers advised it, and an art collection that had been appraised at more than most countries' education budgets. He stood at the head of the conference table and looked at the 9-year-old girl in the navy hoodie and the sneakers with the fraying lace and the silver bird keychain, and something moved across his face. Not cruelty exactly. Something worse. Amusement. The comfortable, unchallenged amusement of a man who has never once been required to update his assumptions about who belongs in a room. This, he said to Preston, is your solution. Not a question. She's apparently... I heard what she apparently is. Vance looked at Zara. His voice was the voice of a man performing patience he does not feel. What's your name? Zara. Zara. He turned the name over like he was checking it for defects. And how old are you? 9. 9. He looked at Preston again. 9. She speaks 4 languages fluently, and... Preston. Vance's voice dropped half a tone. I will handle this. He looked back at Zara. He walked to the end of the table and lifted the first contract packet, 40 pages of dense financial language, dual-columned in English and German, the kind of document that professional translators charge by the clause, and held it out toward her with 2 fingers. The way you'd extend something to someone you don't fully believe exists. Do you know what this is? It's a contract, Zara said. Probably investment terms, given a room. Something flickered across Tobias Krause's face from Frankfurt. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was the expression of a man recalibrating. Vance's smile widened. He was enjoying this. That was the part that would later be hardest to reconcile, that he was genuinely enjoying it. A smart girl. He looked around the room for the laugh he expected. A few people obliged. Not Tobias. Not Yuki Inoue, who had not moved since Zara walked in. Not Farah Tashkentov on the screen, whose expression was now something else entirely. Let me make you an offer, Zara. A real one. If you can translate 2 pages of this, correctly, not approximately, not guessed at, I'll personally write a check for $100,000 to your mother's name. Right now, in front of everyone. He said it the way people say things they are absolutely certain they will never have to do. He said like a man handing a toddler a chessboard. Nadia stepped forward. Mr. Vance, I'll do it. Zara said it without drama, without defiance, without the performance of confidence, which is what an adult would have given. She said it with the flat, simple certainty of someone who has already finished the calculation. She looked at her mother. Her mother's face was a language all its own, fear and pride, and something that had no name, and Zara read it the way she read everything. Completely. Manga. Quietly. I know what I'm doing. And I want you to hold that moment because in that sentence, everything. That child was not performing bravery. She was not performing anything. She genuinely knew. And the most devastating part of what came next is that she was right. And being right cost them more than being wrong ever would have. Stay with me. Zara took the contract. She sat down. She read in silence for 40 seconds. The room shifting in its collective posture, people rechecking their phones. The faint sound of Farah Tashkentov's satellite connection humming on the screen, and then she began. The German was not accented, not approximated, not stumbled through with the halting phonetics of someone sounding out a foreign alphabet. It was fluent. It was precise. It was the German of someone who had learned it at a kitchen table from an elderly man named Mr. Fisher who had spent 30 years as a contract lawyer in Munich before his daughter brought him to Rhode Island, and who had taught Zara, because she knocked on his door every afternoon and asked questions he found, finally, genuinely interesting. Tobias Kraus set down his pen. His associate turned to look at him. He raised one finger without looking back at her. Wait. Zara translated the first page, then the second, then, without being asked, the third, pausing at a clause about financial guarantee structures to note, carefully, that the English version used the phrase contractual obligation where the German version said Erwartet Verpflichtung, which technically translated to expected obligation, and those are not the same thing. The room stopped. Not quieted. Stopped. Tobias Kraus looked at Harrison Vance. His voice, when it came, was very even. She is correct. This discrepancy was flagged by our legal team in August. We were told it was a translation error that had been corrected in the final version. He held up his copy of the contract. It has not been corrected. The silence in the room was not comfortable. Harrison Vance recovered the way men like him always recover from public embarrassment. With a laugh. With a pivot. With the seamless, practiced reflex of someone who has never once been required to stay inside a moment of accountability long enough to feel it. He called it remarkable. He said something about exceptional young minds. He asked Preston to make sure Zara had everything she needed, as though she were a visiting delegate rather than a janitor's daughter who had just caught something his lawyers missed for 4 months. He did not mention the $100,000 again. Zara noticed. She did not say anything. She moved to the Japanese documents, where she and Yuki Inoue worked together. Yuki leaning forward with the quiet, absorbed attention of someone recognizing a talent they hadn't expected, gently correcting Zara's formal register, while Zara absorbed each correction and immediately applied it, the way musicians adjust to a new key. When they finished the third document, Yuki said something to Zara in Japanese. Zara answered. It was not a long exchange. 6 sentences, maybe 7. Yuki's expression did something complicated. Later, much later, Yuki would describe that exchange to a journalist by saying, "She thanked me for teaching her." In Japanese, the way you express gratitude for instruction is specific. It carries the weight of the relationship, not just the act. She used the right construction. She used it perfectly. I had to look away for a moment. Farik Tashkentov, watching from Dubai, waited until the Arabic contract came. Zara picked it up. She read it right to left with the unhurried ease of someone reading their own name. When she reached the third clause, she paused. "Mr. Tashkentov," she said, looking directly at the screen, "this clause references a commercial framework that I believe was amended about 2 years ago. I'm not certain. I need to check, but if the original framework is what's being cited here, there may be an enforceability issue." Farik Tashkentov had not moved in 20 minutes. He moved now. He leaned forward until his face filled most of the screen, and he looked at Zara with an expression that was unmistakably respect. "You are correct," he said quietly. "The framework was amended. My legal team flagged it last month. We have been waiting to see if your firm's counsel would raise it." He looked past Zara to where Harrison Vance was standing. They did not. The meeting ended 2 hours later. The contracts were tabled for legal review. The international delegates were escorted to a lunch that Nadia would later learn cost more per person than she made in a week. Zara was walked back to the break room by Douglas Meade, who pressed a $20 bill in her hand and said, "Good job, kid," and was gone before she could respond. Nadia was in the hallway. She had watched the last part of it through the conference room glass. The Arabic document, Farik's face on the screen, the particular quality of the room's silence. And she had felt 2 things simultaneously. Pride so acute, it was almost physical. And dread. The dread was older. The dread was the thing that 11 years of learning to be invisible had built in her like sediment. The knowledge, slow and solid, that the world does not reward people in her position for being seen. That visibility, for someone like her, in a place like this, was not an invitation. It was a liability. She looked at her daughter coming down the hallway and tried to decide which of those 2 things to show her. Zara made the decision for her. She walked up to her mother, tucked herself under Nadia's arm, and said quietly, "He's not going to pay it, is he?" It wasn't a question. Nadia pulled her close. "No, baby. I knew he wouldn't." "Then why?" "Because it wasn't about the money." They stood in the hallway of a building that had spent 11 years pretending Nadia didn't exist. What was it about? Nadia asked. Zara thought about it for a long moment. I wanted them to know, she said. All of them. Not just him. All the people in that room who were looking at me like I was furniture. I wanted them to know that we see them too. Nadia closed her eyes. She held her daughter tighter. We're going home, she said. The call came on Thursday. 4 days after the meeting. Nadia was making dinner. Rice and chicken. Zara setting the table and telling her about something that happened at school. The kitchen warm and ordinary and briefly, exhaustingly good. When her phone buzzed on the counter. She looked at the number. The Mercer Vance Tower main line. She answered with her free hand, still stirring. Ms. Osei. A voice she didn't recognize. Professional in the way that professional can be deployed like a wall. This is the facilities management office. We're reaching out to inform you that effective immediately, your access credentials have been deactivated. Your contract with the building services vendor has been terminated. She stopped stirring. I've worked in that building for 11 years. We understand. Your final wages will be processed by. Is this because of my daughter? A pause so small it was almost nothing. Almost. The decision was made following a review of vendor-employee protocols. Nadia set down the spoon. She looked at the wall. Thank you, she said, and hung up. Zara had stopped setting the table. She stood on the other side of the counter watching her mother's face, and she did not speak. The kitchen was very quiet. The rice was in a burn, but Nadia couldn't move yet, couldn't do anything but stand at that stove looking at the wall and feeling the specific, familiar weight of a world that could take 11 years of reliability and reduce it to 4 days of liability without a single moment of hesitation. Manga. Give me a minute. Manga. Look at me. She turned. Zara was standing very straight. Her chin was up. Her eyes were full, but not spilling. And the expression on her face was something Nadia had to look away from because it was too close to something she saw in the mirror on her worst days. This is my fault, Zara said. No, I made him angry. I made him feel. No. Nadia crossed her daughter in 3 steps and dropped to her knees and took her face in both hands. You hear me? None of this is your fault. You were extraordinary in that room. You were better than every single person who was paid to be there. And the only reason we're standing here right now is because a small man with a lot of money is too afraid to say that out loud. That is his failing, not yours. You understand me. Zara's chin trembled. Just once. Then she steadied. What do we do now? Nadia looked at her daughter. This child with 4 languages and a silver bird keychain in her grandmother's eyes. And she made the decision she had been deferring for 11 years. Now, she said, we stop being quiet. I need you to sit with that for just a second. 11 years of silence. Because silence felt like safety. Because making yourself small felt like protection. And her 9-year-old daughter had walked into a conference room and blown the whole structure apart in 40 minutes. Some of you know exactly what it feels like to have your child show you who you were supposed to be all along. Drop a like if that hit you somewhere real. She found Cecilia Drummond, or Cecilia Drummond found her. The exact sequence depended on who you asked, and the answer changed depending on what point of the story you were already in. What was certain was this. A Japanese businesswoman had written a short piece for an international trade publication about watching a 9-year-old girl catch a 4-month-old contractual discrepancy during a live negotiation. She had not named anyone. She hadn't needed to. The piece had circulated within a specific, interconnected world of international finance and legal practice, and the people who read it had asked questions, and the questions had eventually found their way to a former neighbor of Nadia's who had moved to the east side and who still followed a community news page that had run a brief story about a local woman losing her job after her daughter went viral. Cecilia Drummond was an employment attorney. She was small and soft-spoken and wore her reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she had spent 22 years in a law that most people found boring until it was the only thing standing between them and nothing. She called on a Friday afternoon. Ms. Osei, I'm not calling to sell you anything. I'm calling because I believe what was done to you is worth fighting, and I think you may have considerably more ground to stand on than you realize. Nadia was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of job applications and a cup of tea that had gone cold. Who are you? Someone who read about your daughter. My daughter is 9. I know. And the man who fired you 4 days after she outperformed his entire legal team in his own conference room is 61 and worth $300 million and has done this before. Nadia went still. What do you mean, done this before? There was a pause on the line, not hesitation, but the deliberate pause of someone arranging what they're about to say. I have a list, Cecilia said. I've been building it for 3 years. 16 names. All service class employees connected to Mercer Vance Tower. All terminated within 60 days of an incident where their personal lives became visible to upper management in some way. A custodian whose son's photo appeared in a local newspaper. A cafeteria worker who attended a public town hall on the building's lease renewal and asked a question. A parking attendant who was overheard speaking fluently to a foreign diplomat and was let go the following week. Nadia stared at the table. He removes them, she said slowly. Anyone who stops being invisible. That is one way to describe it. The legal language will be considerably less elegant, but yes, that's the pattern. Why hasn't anyone done anything? Because each individual case looks like a routine termination. Because these workers don't have the money for litigation. Because the firm's legal team is very good at making paperwork look clean. She paused. And because until your daughter sat down in that conference room with international witnesses on 4 continents watching, there was no case that had enough visibility to survive the pressure they put on it. Nadia was quiet. You're saying Zara changed that? Zara changed everything. 2 weeks into the legal process, a man came to see Nadia. He left a note under her apartment door. Handwritten. No return address. Just a time and a cell number and the words, I know what this cost you. I want to help. She called Cecilia first. Cecilia said, public place, daylight, bring Zara. The man was in his late 60s, slight and careful, with the bearing of someone who had spent decades learning to carry something heavy without letting it show. He sat across from Nadia at a diner on Federal Hill and held his coffee without drinking it and said his name was Elliot Carver. He had been, for 30 years, the senior accountant for the Vance Family Trust. He had retired 4 years ago. He had been trying to decide, for 4 years, whether to do what he was about to do. Harrison Vance built his first fund using capital from his father's estate, he said. His father acquired the bulk of that estate through a land development scheme in 1981 that involved falsified environmental clearances and the displacement of approximately 60 low-income families from a neighborhood in South Providence that no longer exists because his development replaced it. He slid a manila envelope across the table. These are the original documents. I made copies when I left. I have been sitting on them for 4 years telling myself it was too late to matter. Nadia looked at the envelope. She didn't touch it. Why now? Elliot Carver looked at the table for a long moment. Then at her. Because I have a granddaughter, he said. She's 8. And when I saw that video of your daughter in that conference room, when I saw what that man did to a 9-year-old girl for the crime of being smarter than him in public, I thought about my granddaughter. He paused. And I thought about the 60 families. And I thought about the list of 16 you probably have by now. And I thought, I've been telling myself for 4 years that someone else will do this. Someone better positioned, someone braver, someone with less to lose. He looked at the envelope. There is no one else. There never was. Zara, who had been sitting quietly beside Nadia with her orange juice and her notebook, looked up from whatever she was writing. She looked at Elliot Carver with those eyes that missed nothing. Are you scared? She asked him. He blinked. Yes. But you came anyway. Yes. She nodded, as though this confirmed something she had already suspected. That's the only kind of brave that counts, she said. My grandmother told my mom that. Courage that doesn't cost you anything isn't courage. It's just comfort. Elliot Carver looked at Nadia. Nadia looked at her daughter. And somewhere in that exchange, between a retired accountant holding 40 years of guilt and a 9-year-old with her grandmother's eyes, the shape of what was coming finally came into focus. What gets me every single time I return to this story is that the people who ultimately brought Harrison Vance down were not powerful. They were not connected. They were not positioned. They were just people who had decided, one by one, that the cost of staying quiet had finally outweighed the cost of speaking. If you've ever been at that crossroads, share this video. Someone in your life needs to hear this today. Harrison Vance announced his own press conference first. That was the move no one had anticipated. Not Cecilia, not Elliot, not the legal team that had been quietly assembling around them for the past 3 weeks. He stood at a podium in the lobby of the Mercer Vance Tower, flanked by 4 attorneys and a communications director who had previously worked for 2 senators and a pharmaceutical company, and he looked into the cameras with the easy authority of a man who had never once been on the losing side of the story he controlled. The claims being made against the Vance Group represent a coordinated legal attack designed to damage our reputation prior to the announcement of our international investment partnership, he said. The individuals involved have been coached by lawyers with a financial interest in manufactured controversy, and the suggestion that a cleaning staff employee's daughter was somehow harmed by her presence in our building is frankly insulting to the legitimate professionals who work here every day. He paused for effect. We wish the family well, but we will defend the facts. Zara watched the replay on Nadia's phone that evening, sitting at the kitchen table with her notebook open. When it ended, she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook. What are you writing? Nadia asked. What I want to say tomorrow. Tomorrow? Zara looked up. Cecilia said we could do our own press conference. She said the timing was good. She said the Kraus legal team in Frankfurt already confirmed they'll provide statements. And Yuki Inoue published her article this morning, and Ferik Tashkentov's office sent over the legal analysis of the Arabic contract. Nadia stared at her. When did Cecilia tell you all of this? This afternoon, when you were in the shower. A beat. I called her. You called her. She gave me her number. She said I could call any time. Zara returned her notebook. I have things I want to say. I want to say them correctly. Nadia sat down across from her daughter. Zara, look at me. Zara looked up. This isn't a game. If we do this, if we stand up in front of cameras and say what we know, he will come at us harder. He has money and lawyers and people who are paid to make our story sound like a lie. You understand that? Yes. And you still want to do it. Zara's voice, when she answered, was very quiet, but there was nothing uncertain in it. Manga. I speak 4 languages. I can read contracts in 3 alphabets. I can catch errors that teams of lawyers missed. And the whole world already knows it because he showed them trying to humiliate me. She looked at her mother steadily. He handed me the microphone. I think we should use it. The press conference was held on a Wednesday morning at the Providence Public Library. The room was full before 8 a.m. Cecilia went first. She laid out the terminations, all 17 of them now, 3 more having come forward in the previous week. Names, dates, timelines. The pattern was undeniable when you saw it assembled. Elliot Carver spoke next. He was visibly frightened and said everything anyway. Then Tobias Kraus appeared on a video screen from Frankfurt in German with a translator standing to the side and confirmed the discrepancy Zara had caught, confirmed that it had not been resolved as promised, confirmed that his firm was withdrawing from the partnership pending a review of the Vance Group's legal practices. Then Yuki Inoue from Osaka. Then a written statement from Ferik Tashkentov, read by his legal representative. And then Nadia walked to the podium. She had not prepared remarks. She spoke for 3 minutes. She talked about 4:30 a.m. bus rides, about knowing every coffee order in a building that didn't know her last name, about what it costs to make yourself invisible for 11 years, and what it costs when your child, your extraordinary, infuriating, impossible child, walks into a room and refuses to do the same. She talked about what Harrison Vance had taken, and she talked about what he couldn't take. The room was absolutely silent. When she stepped back, Zara stepped forward. The podium was too tall. She stood beside it. She looked out at the cameras and the journalists and the people who had come just to see, and she spoke. In English first, then in French, then in German, then in Arabic. 1 sentence in each language, the same sentence, translated precisely. My grandmother crossed an ocean with nothing but the belief that words could build what money couldn't buy. I am her granddaughter, and I am not finished. Then she looked directly into the main camera. Mr. Vance, you called what I did a party trick. You gave me a $100,000 challenge you were certain I couldn't win because you needed to believe that talent only lives in the kind of rooms you're invited to. She paused. I want to tell you something. I learned German from a retired lawyer who lived below us and was lonely. I learned Arabic from a woman on the second floor who missed her country and wanted someone to talk to. I learned French from an 81-year-old woman who read me poetry every afternoon because no one else had time. You spent 18 months and millions of dollars assembling a legal team that missed a 4-month-old contract discrepancy. I caught it in 4 minutes. Another pause. The difference between us isn't the room we're standing in. It's whether we bothered to learn from the people around us. She stepped back. The room erupted. The Vance Group's international partnership collapsed within 72 hours of the press conference. The federal investigation into the 1981 land acquisition was opened within 2 weeks, triggered by Elliot Carver's documents and a separate inquiry from Rhode Island's Attorney General that had apparently been waiting for 3 years for enough structural evidence to proceed. Harrison Vance resigned from the firm's board 6 weeks later. His lawyers called it a voluntary transition. Everyone who had been in that library room on a Wednesday morning read it differently. The settlement, which came 8 months after the lawsuit was filed and which the Vance Group did not admit wrongdoing to, because they never do, included full back pay and compensatory damages for all 17 terminated employees, a formally monitored employment practices overhaul, and a line item that Cecilia described to Nadia over coffee with considerable quiet satisfaction. The $100,000, with 18 months of interest, made out to Zara Osei. Nadia held the settlement document for a long time before signing it. "How does it feel?" Cecilia asked. Nadia looked at the number. "Like it's not enough," she said, "and like it's more than I thought we'd ever get." Both at the same time. That's usually how justice feels. Is it justice? Cecilia was quiet for a moment. "It's the closest the system gets," she said, "which is not the same thing. But it's not nothing." Zara turned 10 3 months after the settlement. Nadia made her a cake. They ate it at the kitchen table, just the two of them, the way it had always been, and Zara asked for her birthday present to be a beginner's Mandarin textbook because she had decided 5 languages wasn't enough. "Why Mandarin?" Nadia asked. "Because it's hard," Zara said, "and I want to learn the hard ones while I'm young enough that my brain still bends." Nadia looked at her daughter. She thought about the morning 2 years from now, or 5, or 15, when this child would walk into a room and simply take it, without apology, without performing smallness, without the particular exhausted strategy of making herself invisible so that the people with power wouldn't feel threatened. She thought about her own mother, who had come from Ghana at 19 with a talent for listening and the belief that language was the one inheritance no one could repossess. She thought about 4:30 a.m. bus rides and $9 Americanos and 11 years of knowing every name in a building that didn't know hers. She thought about what it had cost, and she thought about what it had built. Zara looked up from her cake. "Your grandmother would have been so proud of you." Zara was quiet for a moment. "Do you think she knows?" "I think," Nadia said, "that wherever she is, she can hear you in 4 languages. And she's arguing with you about the grammar in at least 2 of them." Zara laughed. A real laugh, full and unguarded, the kind she didn't give easily. And the kitchen was warm, and the city outside was ordinary. And for one long, quiet, sufficient moment, everything they had was exactly enough. The Vivian Osei Foundation opened its doors 2 years later, named for Nadia's mother. Its mission was specific and deliberate. Find the children who were learning German from lonely retirees and walk-ups, Arabic from homesick neighbors, French from elderly women who just wanted someone to listen to poetry. Find the children who were absorbing the world through walls that were thin enough to let languages through. Find them before the world decided they were invisible. Find them before they learned to agree. The foundation did not require perfect grades or documented achievements, or the kind of polished story that makes a scholarship committee feel comfortable. It required one thing: evidence that a child was curious, and that no one had yet given that curiosity anywhere to go. In its first year, it worked with 43 children in Providence, Hartford, and New Haven. By its 5th year, that number was 312. Harrison Vance sent a letter once. It arrived at the foundation's office in a plain white envelope, handwritten, with no return address, though Cecilia ran the postmark and confirmed it anyway. It said, "I don't expect you to read this. I'm not sure I would, in your position. But I watched your daughter's press conference 17 times before I understood what she was actually saying. Not the words. The thing beneath the words. She wasn't asking me to respect her. She was telling me I had already lost the only thing worth having, and I'd lost it by choosing not to see it. I'm not asking for anything from you or from her. I just want you to know she was right." Nadia read it once. She put it away. She did not respond. Some things do not require a reply. Some things simply require that you have said what was true and that the right person finally heard it, and that you are already somewhere else by the time it lands. Years later, a graduate student writing a thesis on linguistic acquisition in multilingual urban environments would interview Zara, by then completing her doctorate, already being approached by organizations whose names appeared in the kinds of rooms she had been brought to as a child in a navy hoodie. The student asked her, "What is the thing languages gave you that nothing else could?" Zara thought about it. "Not what I could say," she said finally. "What I could hear. Most people spend their whole lives only understanding the language of the room they were born into. They think that's the whole conversation. Languages taught me that the conversation is enormous, that it was always enormous, and that the only thing keeping most people from it is the assumption that they're not invited." She looked at the student. "My mother cleaned floors for 11 years in a building full of people who never learned her last name. She heard every conversation in that building. She knew more about how power worked in that place than anyone with a corner office. She just never had the credential that made people listen." She paused. "I had the languages. She had the knowledge. Together, we had everything." The girl in the navy hoodie grew up. The woman who had mopped 11 years of marble took her name back. And the building, that glass tower in downtown Providence that had spent a decade and more pretending certain people didn't exist, eventually changed hands, was sold, was rezoned, was eventually converted into affordable housing units that serve, at current count, 62 families. None of them know the story of what happened in the 14th floor conference room. Maybe that's fine. Maybe stories don't need to be known to do their work. Maybe it's enough that a 9-year-old girl sat down at a table she wasn't supposed to be at and read out loud in 4 languages and reminded a room full of powerful people that the world is larger than the rooms they've decorated. That talent doesn't wait for permission, that the invisible have always been watching, and that sometimes, not always, not easily, not without cost, but sometimes the quiet ones get to speak. And when they do, the walls remember. If this story reached something in you, if it made you think of someone you love, or something you've been carrying, or a room you've been told you don't belong in, please share it. Not for us, for the person in your life who needs to hear that the conversation was never as small as they were told it was. Like this video, if you believe that what gets passed down in silence is sometimes the most powerful inheritance of all, subscribe to Oravin's Stories and leave one word in the comments for what Zara made you feel. Just one word. We read every single one, every time.